right, and we'll get going then. So I'm glad you've joined me today. I'm going to talk about USDA's pandemic response and safety grants. I know this notice went out fairly at the last minute. This is a new program. It just was released, I think, last week. And it's a really exciting opportunity, I think, for farmers and for people who do food-related businesses to receive, I think, money that will help them cover expenses that they had for protecting people from their workers and the public from COVID, and then expenses that they plan to have going on until the end of this year. As I said, the purpose is really to provide grants that help farmers and food businesses respond to COVID. And we'll talk in more detail as we go on about more specifically what you can ask for funding for. This is the website, and you will see this web link over and over and over and over again in this grant, in this presentation today. From this main website, most of the information that I'm going to cover this evening is available here, and I think they've done a really good job providing a really good frequently asked questions section, and really all the information that you would need to apply. But I think what I would really like to stress is that this is a very, very user-friendly application. I think anybody can apply who's eligible very quickly. And I really, really encourage every grower or food-related business that would be eligible to, definitely look at this and really to strongly consider applying. The key things that you need to remember is that the application period will close on November 22nd. One thing about this is the grant funding is not first come, first serve. There's about $600 million available currently that's allocated for this grant. And they are going to evaluate the number of proposals they have when the application period closes. And at that point, they'll figure out, how to distribute the money. So there's no advantage to applying tomorrow, but definitely make sure you apply before November 22nd. Grants that you can ask for between $1,500 and $20,000. And once again, I'd like to reiterate, the application is very user-friendly. So there's three major steps that I'm going to go through. The first is getting a DUNS number, because that's a requirement for this grant, and it's very simple. The next step is really to think about your expenditures for eligible purposes over the last year, going into the end of this year, and think about what kinds of expenses you've had that are eligible or that you think that you're going to have, and come up with a number to ask for. And then the last step is really to apply. Once again, the first, this is the website where you would apply. And when you get on that website, you'll see these three green block boxes there, and these take you through the steps. So the first step is really to check to see whether or not you're eligible. Eligibility for this grant, unfortunately, is limited. The focus is really on specialty crops, fruit crops, vegetable crops, producers, dried beans and peas, tree nuts. So if you're a walnut producer, mushrooms, food crops that are grown under cover, and then fruit stock growing. So if you're a nursery that grows fruit trees or blueberry bushes or other fruit plants, you would be eligible. For livestock, under the livestock NIACS code, it's really fish, shellfish, and bees. Apiculture is the only livestock farm production type that's eligible right now. And then there's a whole other class of sort of food-related businesses. First is post-harvest crop activities. And so that would be fruit and vegetable packing, sorting, drying, nut hulling, and shelling. So it's those businesses that sort of do that post-production, ready to get food, sort of raw commodities ready to be sold. And then finally, there's a whole other group of sort of categories of businesses that are eligible. And that's where you really need to look online at the NIACS codes to see whether or not your business is eligible. The major categories are food manufacturing, food wholesaling, all farmers markets. So any farmers market is eligible, and then refrigerated warehousing and storage for food products. So not eligible is dairy, dairy manufacturing, most livestock production except for aquaculture and apiculture, non-food processing and manufacturing. So I had an email today from somebody who produces wool products. Those are not eligible. And most non-food crops and field crops, so field corn, wheat, oil seeds, hay, are all not eligible at the moment. So to determine your eligibility, they're using the NIACS code, which is the North American Industry Classification. And that, and so what you would do is to first, you click on to check your eligibility. If you're a fruit farmer, a vegetable farmer, a mushroom farmer, you're definitely already eligible. But if you're in one of those other areas, you might want to just sort of make sure that you are. Diversified farms, I will cover that. So diversified farms are eligible. So what you would do is if you click on this green box, check your eligibility, there'll be a whole bunch of subsectors in green for all the areas that I've categorized. If you click on one of those, so for example, if I click on subsector 115, support activities for ag and forestry, the 115 is the first three digits of the NIACS code. And then it takes you down to 115, 114, which are the title is post-harvest crop activities, except cotton ginning. But they make a note here that only specialty crop related post-harvest activities are eligible, like packing, sorting, drying. So if you click on that 115, 114, or any other NIACS code that's eligible, you'll then get the link to the definition, and that's where it gets even more specific about what sort of is underneath that code. And I think when you really look at some of the food manufacturing ones, it'll be very important to do this to figure out your eligibility. Diverse businesses. So I had a question about diverse farms. If your business falls under more than one NIACS code, you are allowed, and they have this in the FAQ section, to choose which NIACS code to apply for under the grant. And so a good example would be somebody who is a diversified farm. So they have vegetables and they also have some livestock. For this grant, you would apply using a vegetable NIACS code, and you would be able to apply. Or if you are you're a dairy farm that also has, you do some fruit packing or something for some reason. I don't know why you would, but you do. You can apply under the packing, sorting, dry. You can apply under that NIACS code. Or the other thing is under food manufacturing, if you are a if you do slaughter or processing on your farm, and that's part of your business and part of your sales, you could apply under that NIACS code. So meat processing is allowable under this grant. So there may be under the food manufacturing, food wholesaling, those categories may have some things that fit your farm. So definitely for diversified farms in particular, make sure you go through the options to see if there's something in there that is one of your lines of business. If you have a bakery, for example, I think bakeries might go under food manufacturing. So it's definitely something worth looking at. Another thing is if you have multiple entities. If you're legally organized into multiple businesses, each eligible business can apply separately. That is eligible. So, but each would have to have its own DUNS number, the Dun and Bradstreet number. So I know there's a lot of businesses that I work with, because I mostly work with fruit and vegetable farms that also that are packing, that do packing or and then I know some people that are also food wholesalers. If these are separate lines of business with a separate DUNS number, you can apply, you could apply for $20,000 for one farm and $20,000 for the other farm. Another thing to think about is that, and I'll talk about it in a second, different types of businesses have different thresholds. So you might want to look, maybe you're not a small business under one type of business entity that you are, but you are a small business for a different business entity that you are. And finally, small business. This is targeted to small businesses. And so the eligibility is either based on annual receipts for your business or the number of employees. For crop farming, livestock farming, and post-harvest crop activities, it's all based on annual receipts. And the threshold for the crop farms is 5 million, livestock farms is 5 million, and the post-harvest crop activity farms is 30 million. And that would include your entire business. So if you're a fruit farm that also does packing, and you happen to be at like $10 million, you would probably apply under the post-harvest crop activity NIACS code, because that's a $30 million threshold. The other categories, the food manufacturing, food wholesalers, and refrigerated warehouse, those all have, based on the specific type of business, those all have number of employee thresholds, and they really vary. So you definitely need to go in there and look, especially if you're a slightly larger business. But any farmers market is eligible. There's no small business requirement for farmers markets. So the first step is to make sure to get a DUNS number, or make sure you have a DUNS number. And once again, if you go back to the main website, you can see DUNS registration. If you click on that, it will take you to a site that looks just like this. So what I did is I put my email in, and the first thing you're going to want to do is, and then you put everything that has a red next to it is what you need to put in: your first name, your last name, your company, your job title, your phone number, and the country. The street, city, state, those are all optional. You can fill those in if you want, but you have to do the ones with the red. Job title, I had a question from a farmer I was working with: what should I put my job title? Owner, I think, would be the obvious, or depending on your structure. If it's a sole proprietorship, it would definitely be owner. And then the first step you should do would be to do the DUNS number lookup. And the reason for that is a lot of times people may have gotten one of these numbers years ago and not remembered it. If you've applied for a grant or you've had other federal business, somebody else in your business may have signed you up for one. As I said, the farmer I was working with didn't think he had one, but it turns out when he was doing his small business class, he was working with a lawyer, and the lawyer actually got him one, and he'd forgotten. So do the number lookup first, because if you may have one and you don't know it. If you do the number lookup, you will get this type of a sheet. And I put in my own name as a sole proprietor. If you're a sole proprietor, even if you're doing business as, so let's just say I'm a sole proprietor, but I'm doing business as, Consulting Happiness or something. Your full business name is actually still your name. It isn't the DBA name. So you put your name in, and then the state that you're in. Now, if you're a corporation, you put the company name in there. And the only two that you have to put in are the ones in red. And my recommendation would be to start with just those, because if you have the things in that are wrong, you may get a failed search. And so the less information you put in, the more results will come up. And then you hit lookup. And I got all of these options for Elizabeth Higgins's. And this one was actually me. So it turns out I did have a DUNS number. So I click on select, and there's my information, and there's my DUNS number. Congratulations, I'm done. So at that point, I'm good to go. If you find out, and what they suggest here is that if you don't show up, if it doesn't show up, go back and try a different spelling, include, maybe the city name, and just some other information, because maybe it was done in somebody else's name, not your name. So try a couple of things first. So go, and I think Rich's comment about trying a few variations is a good suggestion. And it's actually on the suggestion of the website also. But if it turns out you don't have one, the next step would be to go back to the site and create a new DUNS number. To request a new DUNS number, it's not a big deal. You just have to provide basic company information, the name of the owner or primary officer, your location. The address should be where your business records are kept. You don't use a PO box. You don't use a a mail, like a mailbox in a post office. It has to be a street address. It has to be a physical location. But it's the main location where like business records are. And this, for farms, you may have lots of like places where the fields are and stuff, but it should be like your main office if you want to say that location. You need that. They'll ask, it's just sort of general like information. When was the business started? Like what year? Things like that. And then you type all that in. And then the other thing you're going to need are 2 documents that support this business information that you entered. So you need to have those also, and they should be scanned in. They can be a PDF, they can be a document format, they can be a JPEG, like a picture. So they're not that picky about the type of file it is, but it has to be a digital file. So they also, those documents have to have your legal business name, which is, if you're sole proprietor, is your name, and the current physical address of the business. So, and they say here that if you should use your full legal name, like Jane A. Doe, that the documents should have that. My tip is look at your documents first, because I never, ever, ever use my middle initial on anything. Like none of my phone bill, none of my information has my middle initial. And so I don't have any documents that have my full middle initial. So when I actually set up my DUNS number, if you go back and you'll notice that I don't have a middle initial. So even though they say you should have all that, if none of your documents will support that, my recommendation is leave that information out. Because the problem is what you can't include are things with personal identifying information like your driver's license, passport, social security number, banking statements. And so they have a bunch of recommended documents. Those can be like, depending on how your business is organized, it could be your articles of incorporation, your tax identification number confirmation letter, your employee identification number confirmation letter, you're doing business as certificate filing or paperwork, if you have a copy of that. But also, like if you're more like me and you're a smaller sole proprietor, it could be something like your mortgage, your phone bill, a utility bill, your tax bill, your an invoice from a third party if you bill people, insurance, proof of insurance card or something. So there's a pretty wide variety, but what they don't want is anything that has information like your social security or anything like that. So once you have 2 of those, and you should be able to get those with your name on it and the exact name of your business, you'll scan those and you can enter those in. It can take 5 business days to be assigned a new DUNS number. So don't wait until the end of November to do this. You will be contacted by the email address or phone number. And then after 5 days, you can also look up the number or case number, and you can go back again at that website. You can do a status check of your DUNS request. If you haven't heard after a couple of weeks, you might want to check that because your number might very well be there. So the next step, after you've gotten your DUNS number or you've got your paperwork for that at least out of the way, the next thing you're going to want to do is figure out what you have for eligible expenses that you're going to apply for this grant funding for. So I'm going to go through the eligible uses, and my recommendation is, as you'll see, USDA does not require you to write a grant proposal that gives them very specific information about what you spent the money on or what you plan to spend the money on. So this is really like going through this is really for your benefit. What you want to think about is, what were my expenses sort of like generally? I mean, maybe not down to the penny, but what number do I feel very comfortable that were I to be audited and asked to provide some level of documentation that I actually had these expenses and paid for them, that I could support that. So don't ask for $20,000 if you only like bought 2 boxes of masks and you basically work by yourself and you didn't do anything. On the other hand, a lot of people I know have done things like, they had to let workers go to get immunizations, and I'll go through that. There's a lot of things that people over the last, year, 2 years almost have spent. And so the time period for this grant is it would be expenditures after January, I think it's 27th, 2020, until December 31st, 2021. So it's almost 2 years worth of expenditures. And the categories are workplace safety. So workplace safety measures to protect workers from COVID. That can be the PPE you've provided, thermometers, cleaning supplies, sanitizer, hand washing stations, new signage you've had to put up to like direct people, any changes you've had to make that protect workers or workers. So it could be online. If you've started like taking credit cards and you didn't before, I know a lot of people did that last year. You developed more, sort of direct, you developed like ways to sort of keep your employees separate from customers. Maybe it used to be that people, I know a lot of CSAs, they'd lay the vegetables out and people would pick them up themselves. But now they like have it all bagged, and that allows the workers sort of to like not be in as much contact with customers. We use online or print materials to communicate market pivots. So, a lot of restaurants I've gone to now, like you have an online menu, you don't have a paper menu anymore. So things like that. It can be retrofitting facilities. A lot of people I know, like you put up protective barriers or plastic sheeting, walk-up windows. If you're a winery or something, maybe heat lamps or heaters, or, like if you've got, for your event places, tents, so you've had to sort of change how you work in order to protect people. If you've got a pick your own or an agritourism, you definitely have probably done stuff like this. Transportation. So, some people like you couldn't have all the workers drive together. So you've had to like get additional transportation. But also for customers, a lot of people have now, they're doing delivery instead of like sort of congregate distribution. I know either any type of transportation change you've had to make in order to have social distancing, either for your workers or for consumers, would be eligible. And worker housing, this could be a big one. Any changes that you've had to make to your housing to protect workers, whether you're getting additional housing, or changes you've made in the housing to make it safer, would be eligible. And then medical, sort of helping people get to vaccinations, like the travel time, and maybe if you've like paid people to go get vaccinations, their work time. If you've had to pay for testing, that would be eligible. Healthcare treatment if you've had infected employees, or paid leave that isn't compensated by other programs would be eligible. I know in some cases, some people had to put workers up into hotels that were sick to keep them away from their families. That would be eligible. So the medical side could be big, definitely for some farms. And so those are the eligible categories. And so what you want to do is sort of go through the last year or two and really come up with a number that you feel like you can support in those categories. And you need to maintain records and documentations, whether it's receipts, emails, sort of like showing, so if you send an email to your workers saying, if you all get immunized, I'll give you 3 hours off. Just let me know if you're going. If you have any sort of records like that, that, showed that you did those sort of things, just keep that stuff. It doesn't have to all be receipts. It could be other types of documentation, but you just want to be able to sort of prove that, you generally spent that much money on COVID protection practices that are eligible. And then grant recipients, you have to keep all that for 3 years after the grant period ends. So that's just something to be aware of if you're thinking about how much to ask for. And so the last step is really to apply. And once again, you go back, it's on this grant site, grantsolutions.gov, hit apply now. And I actually went through this with a farmer yesterday, and it was very simple. This is the page one of the application. So here's the first thing you have to do is put in that DUNS number that you applied for. Then you put your legal name, and if you're sole proprietor, it would be your name, your legal address of where your business is. And then the eligible industry is that NIACS code, and that'll be a drop-down box that lists all of the eligible NIACS codes, and you'll click on the one that is your farm. You have the primary contact and the secondary contact, that information there. So once you've done that, you'll go to the next page, and then the next page is really your ask. And so the first part is the eligible outcomes and activities. And so for each of those categories, the implementing workplace safety, the implementing market pivots, the retrofitting facilities, the providing additional transportation, the worker housing, or the health benefits, for each of those, you'll put down a funding request. And that funding request is either how much you have spent or how much you think you're going to spend between, or both, some combination thereof, between January 2020 and December 31st, 2021. If you have an actual amount of costs that you incurred in that area, you can put that too. So if you've got like phenomenal records, like you've really been documenting this. So let's just say you are requesting for housing, $20,000. But you spent, because you had to secure, $40,000 worth of housing for some reason this year, you can put 40 in that category. And what that says to USDA is I'm asking for only a fraction of what my actual costs were in this area. So to the extent that you have actual expenditures, those actual costs are not what you're asking for. Those are just to give them an idea of what your actual expenses were. And I think politically, if you have that, you don't have to do that. But if you have really good data on your actual expenditures in these categories, and you can really show USDA that like you spend tons of money in this, or way more than you're asking for, that's just something to consider putting there, because that really shows that this money, that it's really needed. But if you don't have that, don't worry about it, because it's not required. What is required is how much you're requesting. And as you can see, you don't need to detail exactly like what you're going to do with it. You just are asking for money in specific categories. And it could be that after you get the money, it doesn't say that you can't spend it in a different category, as long as it's an eligible expense. After that, it'll total up your total funding request. And then at the bottom, you've got what I'd call your affidavit of truthfulness, right? Like by, submitting this application, you're submitting that you are, that you between January 27th, 2020 and December 31st, 2021, you have incurred these eligible costs, that you're not asking for these funds for things that were paid for by somebody else, and that, the amount that you did spend that this is accurate. So you click those two buttons, you put the name in who's submitting it, and then you click that you're not a robot, and then you hit submit, and that is it. Bob's your uncle. It's really that simple. That's the entire application. So afterwards, what's going to happen is that people have until November 22nd to apply, and they're going to make the awards after the close of application and the review period. I've gotten a lot of calls and questions from people who are not specialty crop producers, livestock producers, dairy. And USDA has indicated, if you look at the frequently asked questions, that there might be further rounds, and they might expand eligibility to, crops and commodities that are not currently there. But that will depend on the funding available. And they really haven't said what else. Mostly, I think it's a funding issue. If cumulative requests are more than the funding available, so let's just say people asked for, $1 billion, and they only have $650 million, so they're over by $400 billion, they do reserve the right to reduce the award. So maybe everybody gets a 20% cut of what they've asked for, or something, or they may, they may cut people whose requests are over a certain amount. that's where I think, strategically, if you do have documentation that your expenditures were large, having that there might reduce the amount that you're cut if they end up cutting people's awards. I don't know that, but that's how I would think. They also say that they might target funds to specific sectors depending on the total need in each sector. So it might be that they may find that there's just like huge amounts of need because people spent way more in, maybe, vegetable processing or packing or something than they did in apiculture. So it could be that certain sectors would get more funding. The other thing just to be aware of is that the awards are likely to be taxable as income. And so there is a disclaimer about that too. It's not USDA that determines whether or not grant funding is taxable or not. That is actually done by the IRS or the other, I guess whatever agency does that. So you should assume that if you get this grant that you will pay tax on that. Once again, I want to reiterate that the deadline is November 22nd. So, this is a good opportunity and I would definitely take advantage of it. And with that, if there are any questions, I'm happy to answer them, but, if I know them. If you applied and received CFAP 2 last year for COVID, PPE, and employee expenses, are farmers allowed to apply for this grant as well? Yeah, because CFAP 2 was not actually specifically tied. If you used it for PPE and employee expenses, that was your decision. But CFAP 2 was not tied to that as a requirement. I mean, you could have taken that money and gone to Cancun with it for all they cared. So yes, if you got CFAP 2, that does not change your eligibility. However, I think the grant that could affect this could be if you got the tax credit for, you took a tax credit for employee sick leave. I think, that might be double dipping. If you got Paycheck Protection Program funding, and you used it for something that you can't use something that you use paycheck protection funding for, you couldn't use these funds for. So those would be more in conflict, but CFAP 2, not at all. Any other questions? So good. Well, if there aren't any other questions, that's what I have. I have recorded this, so I'll send a link out to the webinar, and I think we'll have it up on our team's YouTube account. But I definitely hope that either you all will apply or you'll encourage other people to apply. Business expansion. The funds are for expenditures specifically related to COVID protection, so you have to use it for something that is on this list. So I wouldn't say it's for business expansion, but, if you use these funds for the purpose, you then frees up your own money to do business expansion. So flowers are not eligible because you don't eat them. But I think that if you are, you're a strawberry flower grower too. So I think I would apply as a strawberry grower and just, use it for general farm reconfiguration would be the way I would look at that. EIDL is a loan, which you have to pay back. The EIDL advance, if you used advanced money specifically for one of, you can't double, I guess the way to look at it is you can't double dip. So if you've already used grant money and said you've used federal money for a specific purpose, and you had to report on that, then you can't use more federal money for that same purpose. You have to find a different purpose for it. So you can apply for both EIDL advance and for these funds. You just can't use them for the exact same thing. You have to find something else to use them for. But there's a pretty broad swath of things within this grant, I think, that are eligible, that you should be able to find something.